Harold Bennett came upon two lynxes, nearly consumed by the brutal cold, curled against an old snow-covered shed. One of them was pregnant. The male, Atlas, lay in front, exhausted yet still trying to shield his mate, Celine. Both were clinging to their last fragile breaths. Celine forced her head up, golden eyes glinting through the blizzard to meet his an imploring, desperate tilt that spoke more than words ever could. Without help right now, it would all be over. The storm was growing fiercer by the minute, and Harold was forced to choose, not just to save two predators, but an entire family yet unborn. Time was down to minutes, perhaps less. What happened next would test the line between caution and compassion and turn a quiet living room into the stage for one of the wild's most fragile miracles. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our unexpected stories. That February blizzard showed no mercy. A nor'easter roared in from the Atlantic, hammering northern Vermont with winds strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet. Harold Bennett had seen plenty of storms in his 74 years. But this one was different. This one had teeth. He stood at his kitchen window, watching the snow pile high against the barn, and knew he had to check on the horses before things got any worse. "Just the horses," he muttered, pulling on his insulated coveralls. His wife, Eleanor, would have laughed. Talking to himself had become a habit in the 3 years since she'd been gone. Quick check, then back to the fire, he told himself. But the moment he stepped outside, the wind slammed into him like a physical blow, driving shards of ice into every exposed inch of skin. He pulled his scarf higher and trudged toward the barn, his flashlight beam cutting only a narrow path through the swirling chaos of white. The horses were fine, pressed close together in their stalls, calmly chewing hay as if the world outside weren't busy tearing itself apart. But as Harold turned to leave, he heard a sound that made him stop cold. It was nearly swallowed by the storm, so faint it was hard to place. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the groan of timber. He stood still, straining to catch it again. There it was, a fragile cry, almost a plea, drifting from the direction of the old equipment shed. Harold knew every sound his land made in weather like this, and this wasn't one of them. He pushed his way through the drifts, following the noise to a hollow where a rusted plow pressed against the shed wall, forming a narrow windbreak. The beam of his flashlight swept across the snow and froze. Two lynxes lay huddled together in the meager shelter, their fur crusted with ice, their bodies shuddering violently. The larger one, clearly a male, Atlas had positioned his body to shield the female, Celine, from the brutal wind. Harold's breath caught. In all his years on this land, he had only seen lynxes a handful of times, always from a respectful distance. But this was different. These two didn't flee as he approached. They couldn't. The female lifted her head slightly, Celine's golden eyes locking onto his with a plea he never expected to see. That was when Harold noticed her swollen belly, the unmistakable roundness, obvious even beneath the ice-matted fur. "Oh Lord," he breathed. "You're carrying young." The male, Atlas, tried to rise and defend his mate as Harold stepped closer, but collapsed back into the snow, utterly spent. Harold knew he had only minutes, maybe less, before the cold claimed them for good. Without overthinking, he had never been good at that anyway, he shrugged off his heavy coat and knelt in the snow. "Easy now," he said, using the same tone he'd used with spooked horses for decades. "I'm not going to hurt you, but we've got to get you somewhere warm." Celine gave a soft, fragile cry, a sound that felt almost like surrender. Harold carefully wrapped her in one side of his coat, surprised at how light she felt despite her pregnancy. Atlas resisted weakly as Harold lifted him too, but seemed to understand this man meant no harm. Or perhaps he was simply too far gone to fight anymore. The trek back to the cabin felt endless. Harold's arms ached with the weight of the two lynxes, while the wind tried to knock him down with every step. Kicking the back door open with his foot, Harold stumbled into the mudroom, gasping for breath, his body shaking almost as badly as the creatures he carried in his arms. He didn't stop to catch it. These lynxes needed warmth, but not too quickly. Harold remembered reading somewhere that warming hypothermic animals too fast could send them into shock. He carried them into the living room and gently laid them on the braided rug near the wood stove. Not too close, just close enough for the heat to reach them gradually. His trembling hands fumbled for the phone on the side table. Thank God he still had a landline. Eleanor had insisted on keeping it for emergencies. He dialed the number for Vermont Fish and Wildlife, the note Eleanor had once stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. The number he'd never had cause to use until now. "Wildlife emergency," he said when someone picked up. "I've got 2 lynxes nearly frozen. The female's pregnant. I brought them into my house." The voice on the other end, a woman named Dr. Amelia Cross, remained remarkably calm as she walked him through the immediate steps. Warm them slowly. Offer water with a dropper or a shallow dish if they can lap. No food yet. Their systems need to stabilize first. Keep the room quiet and dim. Watch for signs of distress. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I need to be clear about something. These are wild animals, and they can be dangerous, especially when they're scared or protecting young." "Ma'am," Harold replied, watching as the male lynx slowly unfurled himself to stay close to his mate. "These cats are barely alive, and even if they weren't, I buried my wife 3 years ago. I've got more life behind me than ahead. If helping these creatures is how I go out, there are worse ways." There was a pause on the line. "We'll get to you as soon as the roads are passable. That might not be until morning. Then I'll sit with them until morning." And that was exactly what he did. Harold pulled his recliner closer to the lynxes and settled in for a long night. He warmed water on the stove and poured it into a saucer, offering it to them. He exhaled in relief when Atlas, and then Celine, began to take tentative laps. From the linen closet, he found a few old towels, Eleanor's best guest towels, unused since the day she passed, and tucked them carefully around the 2 lynxes' bodies. As the hours passed, the warmth began to work its quiet magic. The creatures slowly started to show signs of recovery. The male Harold had begun calling him Atlas for the way he never strayed more than a few inches from Celine lifted his head, his amber eyes locking on Harold with piercing intensity. Not exactly threatening, but profoundly assessing. "I know what you're thinking," Harold said softly. "Strange house, strange smells, strange old man talking to you. But you're safe here, both of you. And the little ones, too," he added, glancing at Celine's swollen belly. The female he had begun calling her Celine, because even half frozen and heavy with young, she moved with an elegant dignity shifted around midnight. Her breathing changed, becoming deeper, more labored. Atlas immediately grew alert, pressing closer to his mate, and Harold realized with a shock what was happening. "No, not now," he blurted, reaching for the phone again. But even as he dialed, he already knew the truth. No one could make it through this storm. Whatever was going to happen would happen right here in his living room with only him as witness. And hopefully, as help. Dr. Amelia Cross answered on the second ring, as if she had been sitting by the phone, waiting. "I think she's going into labor," Harold said bluntly, without preamble. "All right, Harold. May I call you Harold? Here's what you need to do. Give her space, but stay close enough to intervene if something goes wrong. Lynx mothers are incredibly capable, but the stress and the cold may have caused complications. Have clean towels ready. Keep the room warm, but not too hot. And Harold, just be there. Sometimes, that's all we can do." What followed became one of the most unforgettable nights of Harold's life. Celine labored through the still hours before dawn, while Atlas stood sentinel beside her, and Harold kept quiet watch from his recliner. He found himself speaking to them in a low, steady voice, telling them about the ranch, about Eleanor, about the time they'd rescued a whole litter of barn kittens during a storm not so different from this one. The first lynx kitten arrived just as the wind outside began to ease, a tiny, blind creature that Celine immediately began to clean with fierce devotion. Then came the second, the third, and the fourth. 4 in all, each one perfect despite such a storm-tossed beginning. Atlas carefully sniffed each kitten in turn, as if counting, then curved his body around them, forming a protective arc around his small family. Harold watched it all in silence, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother to wipe away. Life asserting itself, pushing back against every hardship. He had seen it before in calving season, in the spring garden after brutal winters, in Eleanor's eyes during her final days when she had squeezed his hand and told him, "Keep living." And now, once more, here on his living room floor, in the bodies of wild creatures that had placed their trust in him during the darkest hour of their lives, dawn came pale and weary. The storm had finally passed. Harold had dozed off in his recliner, but woke to the sound of faint mewling. The lynx kittens were nursing, their tiny bodies lined up along Celine's belly like keys on a piano. Atlas's eyes opened, fixing on Harold with a look that seemed almost like gratitude, though Harold knew better than to lay human feelings too heavily on them. A knock came at the door around 7 o'clock. It was Dr. Amelia Cross on the porch, with 2 wildlife officers beside her, their truck having somehow made it through the snow-choked roads. "Mr. Bennett?" She was younger than her phone voice had suggested, her kind eyes framed behind wire-rimmed glasses. "How are our patients?" Harold led them into the living room, where she stopped short at the sight. "Oh my God, 4 kittens and they all look healthy." She knelt slowly, professionally assessing from a safe distance. "They're all perfect, Mr. Bennett. Absolutely remarkable." The next hour was a careful ballet of professional wildlife handling. Dr. Amelia Cross and her team had brought specialized carriers, heating pads, and medical equipment. They examined each lynx with gentle precision, taking notes, checking vitals, looking for identification marks. "Harold," Dr. Cross finally said, her face shadowed with concern. "These lynxes, they're not from around here. See this tattoo on the ear? These are captive-bred lynxes. Someone released them illegally, probably thinking they were doing something noble, giving them freedom. But captive-bred lynxes don't have the skills to survive in the wild, especially not in the middle of winter, and certainly not while pregnant." Harold felt a surge of anger. Who could do something so foolish? "This happens more often than you'd think," Dr. Amelia Cross said. "People get exotic animals as pets, then realize they can't handle them. And instead of surrendering them properly, they release them with the illusion that they're returning them to the wild. These 2 would already be dead if you hadn't found them." They prepared the lynxes for transport with absolute care. Celine and the kittens were placed into a large carrier lined with heated blankets. Atlas was placed into another, positioned so he could still see and smell his family. Harold followed them silently out to the truck, his heart heavy, reluctant to let them go. "What happens to them now?" he asked. "First, quarantine to make sure they're healthy and the kittens are developing properly. After that, we'll work on finding the right placement for them, a proper facility, maybe a zoo or a wildlife sanctuary, where they can get the care they need. They can't be released into the wild anymore. Not now. But they'll have good lives, Harold. Safe lives. Because of you." Harold nodded, his throat tight. Then he suddenly remembered something. "Wait," he said, hurrying back into the house. He returned with an old quilt one Eleanor had made years ago, stitched with mountains and stars. He handed it to them to line the carrier. "So they'll have something familiar, something that smells like safety." Dr. Amelia Cross accepted the quilt with the reverence it deserved. "We'll make sure it stays with them. Harold watched the truck disappear into the white landscape, then returned to his empty cabin. The living room felt too quiet, despite the fire still crackling in the stove. The depression in the rug, where Celine had delivered her kittens, seemed heavier than its physical weight. He sank into his chair, eyes fixed on that empty space, letting the memories wash over him. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Cross kept her promise to stay in touch. She called with updates. The lynx kittens were thriving, all 4 strong and growing well. Atlas had been neutered and was recovering nicely. Celine had become a devoted mother. They had found a permanent home for the family at the Green Mountain Wildlife Education Center in Vermont, where they would live in a specially designed habitat and help teach people about lynx conservation and about the dangers of the illegal exotic pet trade. She even sent photographs. Harold printed them out at the library and pinned them to his refrigerator with Eleanor's old magnets. Celine nursing her young, Atlas standing proud. The kitten's eyes newly opened, exploring their quarantine enclosure with the innocent curiosity of all young things. Spring came at last, as it always did in Vermont, sudden and glorious. While tending to his ranch work, Harold often found his thoughts drifting to the lynxes. He had given Dr. Amelia Cross the quilt for them to use, but she returned it once the family was settled, saying Celine had used it to make a nest for the kittens, but no longer needed it. The quilt still carried the faint scent of wild animals and of hope. One day in May, an envelope arrived with the return address of Vermont Fish and Wildlife. Inside was an invitation to visit the lynx family in their new home at the education center. They remember kindness, Dr. Amelia Cross had written in a note. Atlas still searches for you, I can tell. And Celine has taught her kittens to trust carefully chosen humans. You should come see what you saved. Harold made the drive on a Tuesday. When the center was quieter, Dr. Cross met him at the entrance and led him to the lynx habitat. It was a beautiful space of rocks, trees, and a heated den, all surrounded by wide viewing windows where school children could watch and learn about these magnificent creatures. Atlas saw him first. The big male lynx froze mid-stride, eyes locked on Harold, then let out a sound he had never heard before, something between a purr and a chirp. Celine emerged from the den, followed by 4 half-grown kittens, all long legs, spotted coats, and the awkwardness of adolescence. They recognize you, Dr. Amelia Cross said softly. I've never seen them react this way to anyone else. Harold stood at the glass for a long time, quietly watching the family he had saved, now exploring their new home. One of the lynx kittens, the boldest, came straight up to the glass, placing its tiny paws against it, staring at Harold with eyes like golden coins. He pressed his weathered hand to the same spot, where the small paws rested, and the memories rushed back. The terrible storm, the fear, and the miracle of birth on his living room floor. Thank you, he whispered. Whether to the lynxes, to God, or to the memory of Eleanor, the woman who had made him the kind of man who could never turn away from suffering, he wasn't sure. On the drive home, Harold felt something he hadn't experienced since Eleanor's death. A profound sense of fulfillment, that his life's purpose had been carried out. He had been a rancher all his life, raising cattle and horses, stewarding the land in all the traditional ways. But this was different. This was about being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. About being the kind of person who could look past the danger to the need, who could offer shelter in the storm. He thought of Atlas's steadfast devotion, Celine's fierce maternal love, and the 4 small lives that existed because one old man had gone to check on his horses on the worst night of the year. He thought of Dr. Amelia Cross and her team, of the education center, of all the children who would learn about wildlife conservation by watching that lynx family grow strong. That night, Harold sat in his recliner by the fire. The quilt that had once wrapped around the lynxes now lay across his lap. The cabin no longer felt empty. It had become a place where miracles had happened, where life had triumphed over death. where kindness had made all the difference. He picked up the phone and dialed his daughter in Boston, the one he hadn't called in months. "Clara, it's Dad. I want to tell you about something miraculous that happened here this winter. You won't believe it, but I've got pictures to prove it. It starts with a blizzard and 2 freezing lynxes." As he told the story, Harold realized that saving Celine, Atlas, and the 4 lynx kittens hadn't just saved them. In some profound way, which he was only beginning to understand, they had saved him too. They reminded him that life insists on continuing, that love takes many forms, that even in the fiercest storms, grace can arrive on 4 paws, carrying the future in its belly, trusting a stranger's kindness to make all the difference. The lynx family grew strong in their new home, becoming ambassadors for their species, helping to educate thousands of people about wildlife conservation. But to Harold Bennett, they were far more than that. They would always be the creatures who came to him in a blizzard, who placed their trust in him in their most vulnerable hour, who reminded him that as long as there's breath in your chest and love in your heart, you still have something to give the world. And sometimes, on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the wooden cabin on his ranch, Harold would gaze out at the swirling snow and remember. He would remember Atlas's amber eyes, Celine's quiet dignity, 4 tiny mewling miracles, and the night when simply being in the right place at the right time, with an open heart, had been enough to change everything.